In the last 2 years, in 2018 and 2019, I went through the papers and I found that there are around 22 questions from electricity and magnetism alone. So given that the JEE Advanced paper is based on mechanics, electricity, magnetism, thermodynamics, modern physics, optics, at least one of these sections having 20 questions is pretty significant. So in today's class, we are going to solve all the questions from 2019 and 2018 JEE Advanced from both the papers, paper 1 and paper 2. The questions are not in any specific order, but they're only from electricity and magnetism. So here we have the first question in front of you. It's a question about magnetism. It's from 2019, paper 2, question number 10. A 10 centimeter long perfectly conducting wire is moving with a velocity 1 centimeter per second on a pair of horizontal rails of zero resistance. These are rails, so these rails can conduct electricity. So when this rod moves on these rails with a particular speed, this rod is going to behave like a battery. The rod behaves like a battery. So because it behaves like a battery, there will be a current in the circuit. The current will flow through the rails. One side of the rails is connected to an inductor of 1 millihenry. The value of this inductance is 1 millihenry and the resistance is 1 ohm. The horizontal rails L and R lie in the same plane with a uniform magnetic field of 1 Tesla. The magnetic field in this region is 1 Tesla. If the key is closed at a certain instant, the moment you close the key, the current is going to start flowing. The current in the circuit after 1 millisecond is x into 10 to the power minus 3. First of all, why would the current change with respect to time? If you move the rod as shown in the figure, if the rod is moving, the top end of the rod is going to be positive and the lower end of the rod is going to be negative. The rod behaves like a battery. In addition to the battery, we have an inductor and we have a resistor. So if a current I flows in this circuit, we can say that using Kirchhoff's law, V minus L di by dt minus IR is equal to 0. Or in other words, the EMF of the battery is divided between the inductor and the resistor. So solving this equation, L di by dt is equal to V minus IR. We can write that di divided by V minus IR is equal to dt divided by L. Integrating both the sides, di divided by V minus IR is equal to dt divided by L. So when we are integrating, we would have to integrate from 0 to t. The current will start at 0 because an inductor initially opposes any flow of current through it. So initially the current is going to be 0 and eventually with the passage of time, there will be some current I in the circuit. Notice that the question says we should assume the velocity of the wire remains constant. So because the velocity of the wire remains constant, this EMF over here V is a constant. Now integrate both the sides. So on the left side, we have log V minus IR divided by minus R is equal to T divided by L, integrating from 0 to T and going from 0 to I. So this is log V minus IR divided by V is equal to minus RT divided by L, or simplifying 1 minus IR divided by V is equal to minus RT divided by L exponential e to the power minus RT by L. So we can say that I is equal to V divided by R 1 minus e to the power minus RT divided by L. This is the classic switch on equation for an LR circuit. So if you know this formula directly in an exam, you can avoid all the derivation that I just did. At this point, you see that the value of current depends on time. Let's substitute all the values. So I is equal to V. The EMF of the rod is given as V into L into V. So magnetic field is 1 Tesla. The length of the rod is 10 centimeters, which is 10 by 100 meters. And the velocity of the rod is 1 centimeter per second, which is 1 by 100 meters. So this is 10 to the power minus 3 volts. So the value of EMF is 10 to the power minus 3. The resistance is 1 ohm and 1 minus e to the power minus RT divided by L. So minus R, the value of R is again 1 ohm. The value of T is 1 millisecond, and millisecond is 10 to the power minus 3 seconds. So into 10 to the power minus 3 divided by the inductance. The inductance is equal to 1 Henry. The inductance over here is equal to 1 millihenry, so which is 10 to the power minus 3 again. 10 to the power minus 3 cancels. So I is equal to 10 to the power minus 3 into 1 minus e to the power minus 1. Use the value of e to the power minus 1 that's given, 0.37, and you get 10 to the power minus 3 into 1 minus 0.37, which is equal to 0.63. So the value of x in this equation by comparison is equal to 0.63. That's the answer. Okay, so just to summarize the entire thing, because the rod is moving, the rod behaves like a battery. That's the first idea. Because the rod behaves like a battery, this is a classic LR circuit where the switch is switched on. So if you remember the formula for the switch on of an LR circuit, you can directly apply the formula. If you don't, the derivation is fairly easy. Once you apply the formula, the value of V can be derived as B into L into V. This kind of EMF, if you recall, is called as motional EMF. The EMF due to the movement of a conductor is called as motional EMF. And after substituting the values, the question specifies that the value of e to the power minus 1 is 0.37, which gives our answer to be 0.63. Okay, let's move to the next question. A thin spherical insulating shell of radius r carries a uniformly distributed charge such that the potential at its surface is V0. So if you take a shell of charge, the electric field anywhere inside the shell is equal to 0. So the potential at the center of the shell as well as the potential at the surface of the shell, they are both equal to each other. The potential of a shell, if you remember, is equal to K into Q divided by R, where Q is the charge on the shell and R is the radius of the shell. The question says that the charge is uniformly distributed all over the shell. A hole with a small area is made on the shell without affecting the rest of the shell. So when we make a hole on the surface of the shell, wherever we make a hole, a small amount of the charge is lost. So to effect this thing, we can add an equal amount of negative charge. The logic is, let us assume that the entire charge on the shell is positive. If you add a little bit of negative charge, the positive charge and the negative charge will cancel, which has the same effect of drilling a hole on the shell. So instead of drilling a hole, we can add a very small amount of negative charge. How much negative charge should we add? That depends upon the area of the hole. The area of the hole is alpha into 4 pi r square. So the amount of negative charge we should add is Q divided by 4 pi r square multiplied by alpha into 4 pi r square. This is the area of the hole and this is the area of the entire sphere. So dividing it gives us a proportion which is equal to alpha times Q. The amount of negative charge is equal to alpha times Q. The question asks us, what is the potential at the center of the shell? What is the electric field at the center of the shell? And the potential at various points, half r and 2r from the center of the shell. To find out the field or the potential at any point, you can use the principle of superposition. So we can say that the potential at the center of the shell is equal to the potential because of the entire shell plus because of the negative charge that we have added. The potential because of the entire shell is equal to V0. Our negative charge is so small, it behaves like a point charge. So its potential will simply be equal to K into Q because of the negative charge, divided by R, where R is the distance of the center from the surface, which is equal to R. The quantity of negative charge is alpha Q. The potential of the shell is equal to KQ divided by R. So KQ by R can simply be written as V0. So this will be equal to V0 minus alpha V0, which is equal to V0 into 1 minus alpha. The potential at the center of the shell is reduced by 2 alpha V0. No, the potential at the center is reduced by alpha V0. The magnitude of electric field at the center of the shell. As it is, when the shell is complete, the electric field at the center is equal to 0. So when you remove a very small part of the charge, there is going to be an electric field in that direction. The electric field is because of the negative charge that we are adding. The electric field is equal to K into the quantity of the charge, which is equal to alpha Q divided by the distance, which is equal to R square. Is this equal to alpha V0 by 2R? No, because if we write in terms of V0, this is alpha divided by R into V0. It's not alpha V0 by 2R. So option B is also wrong. The ratio of the potential at the center of the shell to that at a point half R from the center. So we have already found out the potential at the center is equal to V0 minus into 1 minus alpha. Potential at a point at a distance of half R. A point that is at a distance of half r from the center is also at a distance of half r from the surface. So the potential at that point will be, the potential at a point at a distance of half r is V0 plus the potential because of the negative charge, which is K into minus alpha Q divided by R by 2. So we can rewrite this as V0 minus 2 times K alpha Q divided by R. Kq divided by R is nothing but V0. So we can write this as V0 into 1 minus 2 alpha. So if you want to find a ratio, we have two terms, the potential at the center and the potential at R by 2. Dividing it, we can see that it matches this term over here. So the ratio of the potential at the center to the point at half R is 1 minus alpha by 1 minus 2 alpha. The magnitude of electric field located on a line passing through the hole and the center at a distance of 2r from the center of the spherical shell. So to calculate this, let us first realize that we have added a negative charge to the surface of the sphere. So adding a negative charge will affect the electric field outside the sphere. So redrawing the diagram, we have a sphere. At the surface there is a hole, so we have added a negative charge equal to alpha q. This is the center. We have to find out the electric field at a distance of 2r. So this distance is equal to r and the distance from the center is equal to 2r. The electric field because of the sphere is because of positive charge and it will be equal to k into q divided by 2r squared. K into q divided by 2r squared. So that will be equal to kq divided by 4r square. Because of adding the negative charge, the electric field because of the negative charge is always towards the charge. So we will subtract an amount equal to k alpha q divided by r square. So k alpha q divided by r square, that amount would be subtracted. The electric field at that point will be equal to how much? Kq divided by 4r square minus k alpha q divided by r square. So it is not reduced by alpha V0 by 2R once again. It is reduced by alpha V0 by R. So option D as well is wrong. The correct option over here is the ratio of the potential is 1 minus alpha by 1 minus 2 alpha. If you solve it, none of the other options match. All right. Let's move over to the next question. This is a question about the movement of a conductor in a magnetic field. Whenever we move a conductor in a magnetic field, there is an EMF that is induced in the conductor, and the EMF is given as, dV is given as V cross B, the velocity vector cross the magnetic field vector, dot the length of the conductor, dl. So in this case, the conductor happens to be a curved conductor in a parabolic shape. If you take the velocity of the conductor, the velocity is towards the x-axis, in the positive x direction. The magnetic field is towards the z direction, in k cap. So V cross B, if you write V cross B, the V cross B is going to be in the downward direction. So if you take a very small part of the conductor, you actually have to take the projection of the length on the y-axis, which will be equal to dy. So if you write the EMF, dV will be equal to V multiplied by B, but b is a variable value over here. So we write b0 into 1 plus y by l whole to the power beta multiplied by dl, and dl is the projection of the length on the y-axis, so we write multiplied by dy. Why are we integrating? We are integrating because it says it's a non-uniform magnetic field. If you have a non-uniform magnetic field, you integrate. If you have a uniform magnetic field, you just simply multiply V, B, and L. So we integrate this thing from 0 to L to find out the EMF induced in the rod. So V is equal to B0 into V into the integration of this term, which is equal to Y plus Y to the power beta plus 1 divided by L to the power beta into beta plus 1, where you go from 0 to L. So if you put L over here, you get B0 into V into, you put L, so you get L over here, plus you put L over here, so L to the power beta plus 1 divided by L to the power beta, which is simply L divided by beta plus 1. Putting 0 will have no value because y is equal to 0, the first term reduces to 0. Y is equal to 0, the second term also reduces to 0. So you simply get B0 into V into L into beta plus 2 by beta plus 1. Now let's solve the options. So delta phi over here is the potential difference. So this is referred to as delta phi in the question. Delta phi is equal to half B0 V0 L for beta is equal to 0. If you put beta is equal to 0 over here, you get B0 VL or B0 V0 L multiplied by 0 plus 2, which is 2, divided by 0 plus 1, which is 1. So you get 2 by 1, not 1 by 2. So the first option is wrong. If you put beta is equal to 2, if we put beta is equal to 2, you get B0, V0, L. 2 plus 2 is 4. 2 plus 1 is 3. So you get 4 by 3, which is right. So B is correct. Delta phi remains the same if the parabolic wire is replaced by a straight wire. See, if you replace the parabolic wire by a straight wire, from the diagram it is pretty clear that for this segment of the wire, the projection will still be equal to dy. So it is basically independent of the shape of the wire, because all we are considering is the projection along the y-axis. So yes, the value will still be the same. You integrate from 0 to root 2L, you'll get the same exact value. The length of the wire will be from 0 to root 2L, which means the projection of this wire will still be equal to L, and the value is going to be the same. Delta phi is proportional to the length of the wire projected on the y-axis. Correct. All right. So both of these done. Let's move over to the next question. A charged shell of radius r carries a total charge q. Given phi is the flux of the electric field through a closed cylindrical surface of height h and radius r with the center same as that of the shell. So when you draw a shell, the center of the shell coincides with the center of the cylinder as well. So you draw a cylinder and a sphere with the same center. This is the radius of the cylinder, that is the radius of the shell, and this is the height of the cylinder, which is h. Which of the following options are correct? Keep in mind that the flux of the electric field depends on the enclosed charge. So phi is equal to q enclosed divided by epsilon 0. So if h is greater than 2r and r is greater than r, how does that look like? If you draw a sphere and you draw a cylinder with a height greater than 2r, so the entire sphere top to bottom will be inside the cylinder, and the radius is also greater than r, so the cylinder completely encloses the sphere. The sphere has a charge of q, so the flux will be equal to enclosed charge, which is q because the entire sphere is enclosed, divided by epsilon 0. So option A is correct. H is lesser than 8r by 5. So 8r by 5 means that the height of the cylinder is equal to 8r by 5. So the distance from the center to the top is just equal to 4r by 5. This length is equal to 4r by 5. The radius is equal to 3r by 5. This radius is equal to 3r divided by 5. So if we make it a right angle triangle, this distance from the center to the edge is equal to r. So the cylinder is entirely enclosed by the sphere in which it is present. The sphere is entirely outside the cylinder. So there is no charge inside the cylinder. Rather, the cylinder is inside the charge. So the enclosed charge is equal to 0. The flux is equal to 0 divided by epsilon 0, which is just 0. So B option is correct. H is greater than 2r and r is equal to 3r by 5. The fourth option is also H is greater than 2r and r is equal to 4r by 5. So let's solve these two questions together. Let us assume that the height of the cylinder is large enough, whereas the radius is not big. So we take a sphere and we draw a thin cylinder with a good enough height because H is greater than 2r. But the radius of the cylinder is not large enough, so the radius is restricted. This is small r. So the flux enclosed by the cylinder will only be the charge enclosed on this top cap as well as the charge enclosed on this bottom cap. So to find out the charge enclosed on these caps, let us say this angle over here is equal to theta. Instead of solving the integration, if you realize that theta is equal to pi, the area of the cylinder is equal to 4 pi r square. So we can say that the area enclosed in these small caps, the area enclosed between these tiny caps is equal to 2 into 2 pi r square into 1 minus cos theta. Or you can do the integration. The integration is fairly straightforward. Or you could say that the area enclosed in these small caps is 2 into 2 pi r square into 1 minus cos theta. Now it says that r is equal to 3r divided by 5. So if you put r is equal to 3r by 5, what is the value of cos theta? This is r. And this is equal to 3r divided by 5. So this vertical value is equal to 4r divided by 5. So we can say that cos theta is equal to base by hypotenuse. So what is the base? Base is equal to 4r by 5. The hypotenuse is equal to r. So cos theta is equal to 4 divided by 5. So if you put that over here, you get the area is equal to 4 pi r square into 1 minus 4 by 5, which is just equal to 1 by 5. What is the charge enclosed on 4 pi r square? 4 pi r square is the area of the total sphere. So the charge enclosed on that will be equal to q. So the charge enclosed in both of these caps together is just equal to q divided by 5. So yes, if r is equal to 3r by 5, the flux enclosed through the cylinder will be equal to q by 5 epsilon 0, which means that option D is wrong. All right, so this is a question about Gauss law. In Gauss law, we know that the flux through a surface depends on the enclosed charge. So basically, to solve all of these options, simply apply Gauss law. Normally, we do not need an integration, but in a case like this one, it helps to know the area of a sphere to a particular angle theta. So if you know the area, you can directly find out the result. If you do not know the area, then you'll have to use an integration where you write dA is equal to 2 pi r sine theta into r d theta, and you integrate it from 0 to theta and you multiply that by 2 times because there is a lower cap and there is an upper cap. Doing that integration will give this result. So options A, B, and C are correct. Let's move to the next question. A parallel plate capacitor of capacitance C has a spacing D between two plates with area A. The region between the plates is filled with N dielectric layers. So you take a capacitor and you say that there are two plates of area A and the spacing between the plates is equal to D. And there are N layers over here. There are N layers. So if you say that the distance between the plates is equal to D, the thickness of each layer is equal to D divided by N. So if you take the mth layer, the position of the mth layer is going to be m into D divided by N. The mth layer is at md divided by N. The dielectric constant is given as K is equal to K into 1 plus m divided by N. So what is the value of m by n? M by n is equal to x divided by t. So the dielectric constant is equal to K into 1 plus x divided by t. For a very large value of n, the capacitance is equal to this much. How do we find out the capacitance of a combination like this? So what we do is we take one of these layers. Each of these layers is a very small capacitor DC. The area of the plate is equal to A. The dielectric constant is equal to, as given, K into 1 plus x by d. And the thickness of this small layer is going to be equal to dx. So the capacitance is equal to epsilon 0 A K into 1 plus x by d divided by dx. So because all of these capacitors are placed one after the other, these capacitors are in series. So we can say that 1 by dc is equal to dx divided by epsilon 0 A K into 1 plus x by d. 1 by dc, because when you take capacitors in series, the 1 by c net is equal to 1 by c1 plus 1 by c2 plus 1 by c3, so on. So we'll first take the reciprocal and then we'll integrate from x is equal to 0 to x is equal to d. So that will give you 1 by c net. 1 by c net is equal to 1 by epsilon 0 a k, the integration of 1 plus x by d, that is log 1 plus x by d divided by 1 by d. You integrate from x is equal to 0 to x is equal to d. So this is equal to how much? D divided by epsilon 0 ak multiplied by, if you put d over here, you get log 2. If you put 0 over here, you just get 1. So it is d divided by epsilon 0 ak into log 2. The question says that the capacitance is required to be alpha k epsilon 0 a divided by d log 2. The value that we found for 1 by C net is that C net is equal to epsilon 0 A K divided by D log 2. So by comparing all these terms over here, we see that everything cancels out and the value of alpha should be equal to 1. So the value of alpha is 1. All right, this is a question about series capacitors. If the dielectric changes, we know that we find out the slice of a capacitor. We integrate the slice to find out the total capacitance. So this is a question based on capacitor slices. Fine, let's move to the next question. The next question says that there are two identical moving coil galvanometers with a 10 ohm resistance and a full scale deflection of 2 microampere current. So the galvanometer shows a full deflection when the current is 2 microamperes and its resistance is equal to 10 ohms. All right. One of them is converted into a voltmeter. So to convert a galvanometer into a voltmeter, we connect a shunt resistance in series with the galvanometer. This converts it into a voltmeter. To convert it into an ammeter, we take a galvanometer and we connect a shunt resistance in parallel with it. So that converts the entire thing into an ammeter. So we want the voltmeter to have a reading of 100 millivolts. So if the voltmeter has a reading of 100 millivolts, that means that providing 100 millivolts will make a current of 2 microamperes flow. So current will be equal to, if voltage is equal to 100 millivolts, the current will be equal to 2 into 10 to the power minus 6 amperes, which means that the resistance required in total is equal to 10 to the power minus 3 multiplied by 100, 10 to the power 2 divided by 2 into 10 to the power minus 6, which is nothing but 50 kilo ohms. So the total resistance should be equal to 50 kilo ohms. The first option says the resistance of the voltmeter will be 100 kilo ohms. No, the first option is wrong. The resistance of the ammeter will be 0.02. Let's check for here. The ammeter should have a full scale reading of 1 milliamperes. So if you provide 1 milliampere to the entire ammeter, what is the potential difference across the ammeter? V is equal to IR. So the potential difference will be 1 milliampere multiplied by the resistance of the ammeter. At the same time, the current through the galvanometer should be equal to 2 microamperes. So the voltage through the galvanometer will be 2 microampere multiplied by the resistance of the galvanometer, which is equal to 10 ohms. If you see, the ends of the galvanometer are also the ends of the ammeter because this total device is the ammeter, which means that both of these voltages should be equal. So 10 to the power minus 3 ampere into the resistance is equal to 20 into 10 to the power minus 6. So the resistance is equal to 20 into 10 to the power minus 3, which is 0.02 ohms. So the resistance of the ammeter will be 0.02 ohms. Yes. The measured value of R. These are then used to measure the voltage and current in an Ohm's law experiment. So what does Ohm's law experiment look like? Ohm's law experiment is nothing but applying V is equal to IR. So we take a battery, we connect an ammeter to this thing, and then we connect a resistor, and we connect a voltmeter across the resistor. This is basically Ohm's law experiment. And we say that I is equal to V divided by R, where V is the voltage that the voltmeter measures, not the EMF of the battery. So first of all, if you connect something up like this, what is the current that is going to flow through the circuit? The resistance is equal to 1 kilo ohm. The resistance of the voltmeter is equal to 50 kilo ohms. So the equivalent resistance of the circuit will be equal to, the equivalent resistance will be equal to 50 into 1 divided by 50 plus 1. So 50 divided by 51 kilo ohms. The EMF of the battery will be equal to V0. So the current flowing through the entire circuit will be equal to V0 divided by 50 into 51 kilo ohms. This is the current flowing through the entire circuit. What is the potential difference that this voltmeter will show? The potential difference shown by the voltmeter will be equal to I multiplied by R. The current flowing through the voltmeter will be 1 by 51 times the total current, which is 51 by 50 into V0 divided by kilo ohms, which is nothing but V0 divided by 50 milliamperes. So if you try to find out the resistance using this method, you would see that the R net value will be equal to 50 divided by 51 kilo ohms. 50 by 51 is approximately 0.98. So when it says that the measured value of R will be approximately 980, 978, that answer is correct. If the ideal cell is replaced by a cell of internal resistance 5, then the measured value of R will be more than 1000 ohms. If you notice that in this entire calculation, the value of V0 cancels out and we get a final value of R net that does not depend upon the EMF of the battery. So if you replace the battery with something else with an internal resistance of 5, that is not going to make any difference. So the last option is wrong. All right, this is a question about converting a galvanometer into an ammeter or a voltmeter. So you should be clear that to convert it into an ammeter, you provide a shunt resistance in parallel. To convert it into a voltmeter, you connect a shunt resistance in series. Let's move over to the next question. In the circuit shown, initially there is no charge on the capacitors and the keys S1 and S2 are open. The values of the capacitors are 10, 30 and 80. So this is 10. The value of C2 is equal to 30. So this is 30. C3 and C4 are both equal to 80 microfarads each. At the time t is equal to 0, S1 is closed. So when the switch is closed, a capacitor behaves just like a wire. It allows all the current coming to it to just simply flow through it without any obstruction. The instantaneous current can be found by just shorting all the capacitors. So if you take and short all the capacitors, you'll find out the instantaneous current. So how many resistors are there? 30, 100 and 70. That makes it 200 ohms. So the current is equal to 5 volts divided by 200 ohms, which is equal to 25 divided by 1000 or 25 milliamperes. So the current in the circuit is equal to 25 milliamperes. Option A is correct. If the key S1 is kept closed for a very long time, if you keep the key closed for a very long time, a capacitor that was letting all the current flow through it will eventually behave like an open circuit. It will not let any more current flow through it. So eventually, after a very long time, the amount of current flowing through the circuit will just become equal to 0. There will be no current flowing through any of these wires in the circuit. However, because all of these capacitors are in series, they will all have the same charge. Now simply apply Kirchhoff's law over here. Cross the battery first, that's plus 5 volts. Then cross the capacitor, which is equal to Q by 80, because Q is equal to CV, so we can write V is equal to Q by C. Cross the next capacitor, which is Q divided by 10. Cross the capacitor after that, which is another Q by 80. Now try to add all of these. This will be equal to 0 because the potentials through a closed loop is equal to 0. So 5 is equal to Q by 80 plus q by 80, which is 2q by 80 plus q by 10. So 2q divided by 80 plus q divided by 10, which is how much? 8q divided by 80, 10q divided by 80, or q divided by 8. So q is equal to 40 microcoulombs. If q is equal to 40, then in this capacitor, the voltage will be equal to q by c, which is equal to 4 volts. So this voltage will be the same voltage across these 2 points, P and Q, or any of the top and bottom part of the circuit. So it says that the voltage across the capacitor will be 4 volts. Yes. The key S1 is kept closed for a long time so that the capacitors are fully charged. Now key S2 is closed. At this time, the instantaneous current across the 30 ohm resistor. See, when you close the key S2, once again, all the capacitors in this circuit are going to behave like closed circuits. However, initially these capacitors have a certain amount of charge stored in them. So not only will they allow the current to flow through them, they will also behave like a battery. So replacing the left part of the circuit with an equivalent battery, you'll see that this capacitor over here has a EMF of 4 volts. So write this is equal to 4. The resistance over there is equal to 70 ohms. So that is equal to 70 ohms. Here this is 10 volts. So the 30 ohms over here is 30 ohms and the battery is 10 volts. The capacitor over here behaves like a short circuit. Initially it had no charge, so there will be no EMF at all. This is equal to 0. What is the current flowing now? The current is 10 minus 4, 6 divided by the total amount of resistance in the circuit, which is equal to 100 ohms. So that is 10 minus 4, 6 divided by 70 plus 30, which is equal to 100. 6 by 100 is 0.06 amperes. However, to the other part of the circuit, there is also a resistance of 30 ohms and a resistance of 100 ohms. So not only will the current flow in this direction, the current is also going to flow in that direction. So simply writing the left part of the circuit will not work. We also need to write down the values on the right part of the circuit. So you have 5 volts over here. We have 30 ohms on that part of the circuit. This is 30 ohms. There is a capacitor over here which will behave like a battery of again 4 volts, and then there is 100 ohms on this part of the circuit. So this is 100. So putting all of these values together, writing that the current over here is equal to I1 flows to this side, I2 flows to the other side. If you write down the equivalent, then you will get 10 volts minus 4 volts, which is just equal to 6 volts across these 2 points. Since the potential across the top and the bottom part of the circuit is 6 volts and the resistance is equal to 30 ohms, then we can write 6 volt divided by 30 ohm is equal to 0.02 amperes. So, 6 divided by 30 is equal to 0.2 amperes. So, the third option says that the current through the middle part of the circuit will be 0.2. That is correct. Instead of doing so much, we could do a very simple thing. Instead of calculating through all the separate branches of the circuit, instead what we could do is to say that the potential between the top and the bottom part of the circuit is equal to 4 volts like we calculated. So ignore the rest of the circuit and simply draw the part PQ. So P is at the top, Q is at the bottom, and there is a battery over here. This is 10 volts. The potential at P is already 4, the potential at Q is equal to 0. So it's equivalent to having a 4 volt battery in the opposite direction. So the net potential is 10 minus 4, which is equal to 6. The net resistance is equal to 30 ohms. So that is equal to 30. And you could say that the current is 6 by 30 directly, which is equal to 0.2 amperes. This is a much faster way of solving this question. In the last part, it says that if the key is kept closed for a long time, the voltage difference between the points P and Q will be equal to 10 volts. No, the voltage difference will never be equal to 10 volts. Because even if you keep S1 closed for a long time, the potential difference between P and Q will be equal to 4 volts, not 10. So the last option is wrong. This is a question about RC circuits. If you close a switch, initially a capacitor behaves like a wire. After a very long time, the capacitor behaves like an open circuit. So by using that idea, you can solve all 4 of these options. Let's move to the next question. The next question is about LR circuits. There are 2 circuits over here with 2 batteries and an independent connection in the middle. If you close both of these switches, like the question says, so you will have a current flowing in this direction as well as a current flowing in the opposite direction. So in the middle part of the circuit, the current on the left flows down, whereas the current on the right is flowing up. The switches S1 and S2 are closed simultaneously. Both the batteries have the same magnitude. Ignore mutual inductance between the inductors. Find out the value of I max. First of all, the value of I is equal to V divided by R into 1 minus e to the power RT divided by L, as we just discussed in the first problem today. So if you have two currents flowing in opposite directions, I1 because of this and I2 because of the right side, so I1 is equal to V by R, I2 is also equal to V by R because the resistance is the same. 1 minus e to the power RT divided by 2L. So this is the total current. These currents are flowing in opposite directions. So when you add them up, they'll actually subtract. So I net is equal to V divided by R into e to the power minus RT divided by L minus e to the power RT divided by 2L. This is the total amount of current. We need to find out a maximum value. So to find out the maximum value, di divided by dt should be equal to 0. So differentiating this and making it equal to 0, you'll see that R divided by L into e to the power minus RT by L is equal to R divided by 2L e to the power minus RT divided by 2L. Correct? So if you cancel this and that one, you get e to the power RT divided by 2L is equal to, this goes to the right side, e to the power RT divided by 2L is equal to 2 because R by 2L is also going to cancel. So you're just going to get 2. Take log of both sides. RT divided by 2L is equal to log 2. So T is equal to 2L divided by R log 2. Option D. So at T is equal to 2L by R log 2, you will have the maximum amount of current in the circuit. What is that value equal to? So I net is equal to V divided by R. Put T is equal to 2L by R log 2. So if you put that over here, you will get e to the power minus RT by L minus R divided by L into 2L divided by R into log 2, which is just basically equal to 1 by 4. Minus e to the power RT divided by 2L, which is equal to minus R divided by 2L into 2L divided by R into log 2. So which is just basically equal to 1 by 2. So the total amount of current in the circuit will be equal to V divided by 4R. We have a minus sign just to represent the direction. The net current will be equal to V divided by 4R. Anyway, how could I say that both of these circuits are going to be independent of each other? I could say that because if you see the circuit, if you see the top part of the circuit, here the potential is equal to V, here the potential is equal to minus V, and here because we are taking it down, we could say that the potential over here is equal to 0. So when you start on the left, the potential is V, on the right the potential is minus V, and in the middle the potential is equal to 0. So over here the potential difference is V, over here the potential difference is V, and the current flowing just circles back through the middle part of the circuit. So there are two basically currents, I1 and I2, moving in opposite directions. These two circuits are independent of each other. The current of one doesn't go to the other part. So we can solve it individually as two LR circuits. This is the formula for the switch on of an LR circuit. There are two different currents moving in opposite directions. So you subtract them, put the values, and find out the answer. Should be fairly simple. Let's go over to the next question. There are two infinitely long straight wires lying in the xy plane along the line x is equal to plus and minus r. The wire located at x is equal to plus r carries a constant current I1, and the wire located at x is equal to minus r carries a constant current I2. A circular loop of radius r is suspended with its center at 0, 0, 3r. So we have an xy plane, and above it at z is equal to root 3r there is a circular loop. So this distance is equal to root 3r. At x is equal to plus r and minus r, plus r and minus r, there are two current carrying wires. Fine. The current in the wire is taken to be positive if it is in the j direction. So this is j, this is I, and that is k. If I1 is equal to I2, so the current in I1 is the one at x is equal to minus r. I1 is the current over here. And the current at x is equal to minus R is actually I2. I1 is for plus R, minus R is for I2. If I1 is equal to I2, B cannot be equal to 0 at the origin. Let's check that. If I1, so I1 is the current going up, so the magnetic field is going to be like this. I2 is a current that is going up, so the magnetic field is going to be in the downward direction. I1 is equal to I2, so both of these currents, the magnetic field cancels out. So B cannot be equal to 0. Yes, because there is a current flowing in the loop above, there will be a magnetic field either in the downward direction or in the upward direction. So B cannot be equal to 0. Option A is correct. I1 is greater than 0. I2 is less than 0. So if I1 is greater than 0 and I2 is less than 0, the net magnetic field will be in the upward direction, because this magnetic field is going to win over the other magnetic field. The net magnetic field will be in the upward direction. B can be equal to 0. Yes, it can be. Because if you take the loop and the current in the loop in such a way that the magnetic field is in the downward direction, then the upward magnetic field can be cancelled by the downward magnetic field. So yes, it can be 0. It won't always be 0, but you can adjust the currents in such a way that it can be 0. I1 is lesser than 0, I2 is greater than 0, B can be equal to 0 at the origin. Again, it can be, because the magnetic field will be in the downward direction. We can have a loop carrying a current in any particular direction, and the magnetic field can be adjusted to be 0. So option C is also correct. However, if you notice that it doesn't allow us to adjust the current on our own. The current in the loop is constant and it is fixed in a clockwise direction. So if the current is fixed in a clockwise direction as seen from the top, it means that the magnetic field is always going to be downward. So if the magnetic field is always downward, it cannot cancel a downward facing magnetic field. So if I1 is lesser than 0 and I2 is greater than 0, then B can never be equal to 0, because both of the magnetic fields are going to be in the same direction. So this is not possible. If I1 is equal to I2, the Z component of the magnetic field at the center of the loop is equal to mu 0 I by 2R. This is a fairly simple thing to derive and find out. We can say that the magnetic field down at this point will be equal to mu 0 I divided by 4 pi r square, or you can just take the area of the loop, that will be equal to pi r square divided by r square plus x square to the power 3 by 2. So x square over here is like root 3r square, which is equal to 3r square plus r square, 4r square square root 2r. So if you cancel out these values, you'll see that the magnetic field is equal to mu 0 I by 2r. This option is also correct.